Welcome to Monday Night Politics, hosted by the Dallas Examiner newspaper. The Dallas Examiner has been hosting Monday Night Politics for approximately 10 years. We invite all candidates for elected office to participate in Monday Night Politics. The Dallas Examiner does not endorse candidates. We believe strongly in letting our community know about the candidates, so when you go to vote, you are an informed voter. Our moderator for tonight is Demetria McCain. Demetria is a Dallasite and she's a community activist. Demetria.
Well, good evening. We have made it to the home stretch in our series of Monday Night Politics. What in the world are you going to do next Monday evening, folks? I wonder. So here we are. We've got two races to talk about today. We'll talk about the U.S. senatorial race, and we'll also talk about one of our judicial races. We have invited 4 candidates here today. For our U.S. senatorial race, we have invited MJ Hagar and John Cornyn. And for our judicial race, we've invited Marcella Moore, Judge Marcella Moore, and Jordan Lewis. And so we'll start today with our senatorial race. Again, those invitees are MJ Hagar and John Cornyn. But first of all, a few housekeeping things for us, and some of you might be joining us for the first time. So here's the deal. So we start with 2 minutes per candidate. We end with 2 minutes per candidate. In between, there will be questions, and you are free to use the Q&A box, not the chat box, but the Q&A box for your questions. I'll have a few, and then I'll throw some questions out to you. But please, folks, you know, we've had a very interesting election season this year. Let's try to stick to the policies, folks. That's what this audience wants to know about, all right? And I can tell you right now, I'm not gonna be able to get to all the questions. I will get to as many as I possibly can. We do have a timekeeper who is Christy Thomas, who will be keeping time for us. Christy, would you please let us hear the sound of the buzzer?
Sure. 1 second. 1 second.
Okay, I think everybody heard that. Sounds pretty frightening to me. Thank you very much, Christy Thomas. As you saw, Molly Belt, the publisher of the Dallas Examiner, is our key sponsor, but we have many other sponsors and many other volunteers who get the word out about today. We also have Alyssa Patterson, who's helped with some of our IT Zoom stuff in the background. Alyssa, you want to just wave to folks? If you could, right quickly. Let's see here. How can I do this? There we are. All right. So I'm going to name some of our co-sponsors, and then we're going to get started with some opening statements from the candidates. But our co-sponsors, which you may have seen on the screen earlier, include the NAACP Dallas chapter, the Dallas Alumni chapter of Delta Sigma Theta Sorority Incorporated, the Metropolitan Dallas chapter of Delta Sigma Theta Incorporated, the Alpha Sigma Lambda chapter of Alpha Phi Alpha Fraternity Incorporated, the Dallas Alumni chapter of Kappa Alpha Psi Fraternity Incorporated, the Dallas Association of Realists, the Dallas Panhellenic Council, the Theta Alpha chapter of Omega Psi Phi Fraternity Incorporated, Iota Phi Theta Fraternity, the Omicron Mu Omega chapter of Alpha Kappa Alpha Sorority Incorporated, the Dallas Black Chamber of Commerce, the Greatest Dallas League of Young Professionals, the North Texas Cluster of the Links, the South Dallas Business and Professional Women's Club Incorporated, KHVN, the Commish Radio Show, St. Luke Political and Social Action Ministry, and none other than our usual in-person host, the African American Museum. And we all wish we were there today, but we can't be. But in the meantime, know that I'm sure they would welcome you visiting their website and maybe leaving a donation if you'd like. These are hard times for a lot of our institutions. So with that being said, I'm going to make sure that everybody's videos are muted while our candidates are doing their opening statements. And so we have only so far today MJ Hagar. If Senator Cornyn shows up, then we'll give him his time for his opening statement as well. And so if my timekeeper is ready, we want to welcome MJ Hagar. Thanks for being with us here today. And
Ready.
we ask you to go ahead and get started with your 2 minutes, and I will get out of the way. Go right ahead.
Great. Thank you so much, Demetria and Molly. So good to see you. Thanks to the Dallas Examiner for hosting me for tonight's Monday Night Politics. You know, I know there are a lot of other things that y'all could be doing with your time. I'm so grateful for you tuning in and paying attention. So many people are tuned out. And so for those of you who don't know me, I grew up in Texas, spent 12 years in the military, 5 working in healthcare, 2 in tech. I got my undergrad and my executive MBA from UT Austin. And I am running for the Senate as a fulfillment of the oath that I took to support and defend our Constitution when I put on the uniform, but also because of my ardent desire to protect my 2 boys that are growing up into the world and inheriting this country, and all of our kids. And they may make a cameo tonight, hopefully not, but we'll see. You know, I take it very seriously what they're inheriting from us, and I think that we can do better. We need to fight to ensure that Texas is a place where, regardless of race, folks have equal opportunity to build good lives and that generational wealth through business. Far too many Black Texans, this is just not the reality for y'all. So I am absolutely committed to talking to as many people as I can. A lot of people who feel like their vote has been taken for granted in the past. That they were made promises that were never fulfilled, which is why it's so important for me to be here, not just talking to you, but hearing from you, and not just asking for your vote, but really earning your vote. And hopefully I'll be given an opportunity to do that tonight. I'm committed to uplifting voices of Black Texans and candidates up and down the ballot. Frankly, from healthcare inequities, including being the state with one of the worst maternal mortality rates for Black women in the entire country, to police brutality, to lack of access to economic capital. Black communities here in Texas are some of the hardest hit and least supported. And to address these challenges, we really need to elect leaders that are committed to showing up and fighting, not just during campaigning, but while we're in office. Because I can't win without Black voters, but I can't legislate and represent this state without Black Texans' input. So thank you so much. I look forward to hearing your questions.
All right. Well, here we go. We have a few already queued up here in the Q&A box, but I'll start with some topics that I know our audience is interested in. You mentioned a couple of topics in general, but here are some more specific questions.
Okay.
This topic is police brutality. This month, the Community-Based Response Act of 2020, which would provide local funding for alternative police responses when mental health issues are at play, was introduced by the Congressional Black Caucus Chair, Representative Karen Bass, and Senator Van Hollen. It is an extension of the work done regarding the George Floyd Justice and Police Accountability Act, which passed the House, but is stalled in the Senate. You're running for a senatorial position.
Mm-hmm.
Would you support the Community-Based Response Act? And what kind of leader would you be, if elected, regarding police accountability issues, particularly the struggle to get things through the Senate? You have 1 minute to respond.
Oh, goodness. Well, I was endorsed by the Congressional Black Caucus because I am so committed, and I'm so happy that the things that we've been calling for, like reforms in police brutality and in criminal justice reform in general, are becoming more mainstream. And so I'm not familiar with exactly what is in the bill, but I can tell you I am supportive of a lot of the same things that they fight for. Specifically, I will say that a lot of bills are stalled in Mitch McConnell's legislative graveyard, and we need to work with and lift up leaders within the law enforcement community that are transparency and accountability minded. There are even police unions that are calling for, police officers to have better relationships with the communities that they're policing. I've been supporting Campaign Zero for a long time, and so that's a long list of policing reforms. The fact that we have people like John Cornyn, who on the Senate floor say things when they're talking about policing reform, say things like systemic racism doesn't exist. That is a problem. That's a red flag for me, because we can't solve these problems if we are in denial about them. So a lot of policing reforms I support, like reforming qualified immunity, banning chokeholds. Campaign Zero talks a lot about making sure that police are from and representative of their communities, civilian community oversight. There's a lot that we can do, but we have to do so much more. I hope we have a chance to talk about these other things too, because the policing reforms that we need are really from a symptom of a greater, deeper problem that is systemic throughout healthcare, economic, housing, education, and so many others. Hard to squeeze that into a minute, Demetria.
It's hard.
Talk
It's
about
hard. There are a lot of questions in the queue, though. We want to get
Okay,
to
all right, we'll get to them all.
as much as possible. Okay, next topic is voting rights. In 2013, the U.S. Supreme Court, in a decision called Shelby County versus Holder, voided out Section 5 of the 1965 Voting Rights Act, the pre-clearance portion that was pointed at states that had a history of discrimination, ensuring that if they make any changes to election laws, that they need to be pre-cleared by the Department of Justice, and in some instances, the D.C. Circuit Court of Appeals. What is your position on the act that's trying to reinvigorate or return to us the pre-clearance position? It's now called the John Lewis Voting Rights Act of 2020. What is your position on that?
I support it fully. I support it fully, and I think that anyone who doesn't see that there is significant voter suppression, all they have to do is tune the news of Georgia and the long lines. All they have to do is tune into Greg Abbott and the things that he's doing to try to reduce the number of places we can drop off mail-in ballots. We have a long history of voter suppression in Texas, and it's part of why I'm so committed to flipping the state house and fully supporting the John Lewis Voting Rights Act. Part of the reason I'm running for Senate and not running for my congressional seat again is that I believe that, you know, I used to be a wildfire suppression helicopter pilot, and I was trained to scoop up a bucket of water and drop it where the fire is. And the fire is in the Senate because not only Mitch McConnell's legislative graveyard, like we talked about just a second ago, but the hyper-partisanship of our judicial branch. And we're seeing that now. We're also seeing the Supreme Court right now, as all of the urgency in the Senate is around rushing through a nominee instead of talking about COVID relief. They are hoping she will rip away the Affordable Care Act. They're hoping that she will overturn Roe v. Wade, but voting rights are 100% on the ballot and at stake right now. So I fully support the John Lewis Voting Rights Act. I got it in there.
Buzzer just came in. Okay, next topic is housing. Representative Maxine Waters co-sponsored the Emergency Rental Assistance and Rental Market Stabilization Act. That bill will provide $100 billion in emergency rental assistance. And again, it passed the House as part of the HEROES Act, and it has since been updated. What plans do you have to assist Texans, especially Black and Latinx residents, who are disproportionately represent those who are hardest hit housing-wise during this pandemic? But not just during this pandemic. They're disproportionately hit housing-wise even before the pandemic occurred. So what are your issues and positions and plans regarding housing?
Well, I think that Black and Brown Texans are disproportionately affected by just about everything. Before the COVID pandemic, we saw hurricane relief, we see toxic chemicals and plants put in Black and Brown communities disproportionately. We have healthcare disparities, we have lack of access to education and business capital. But I'm so glad that this question is about housing, because so much focus is put on a living wage, which is important. We need to talk about raising living wages. But until we also partner that with reducing the cost of living, the majority of that being in housing, I don't think that we're going to have the huge impact that we're hoping to. You know, there's a lot of reasons that the Black and Brown communities in Texas have been disproportionately hit with COVID, whether that was the already existing healthcare disparities or the higher the chances of Black and Brown Texas working in frontline jobs that are keeping our country and our state moving forward. But it's also, we see it in the minority-owned businesses, having 90% of minority-owned businesses not getting the PPP loans that they wanted. It's part of when I talk about systemic racism being a larger issue and that we have to attack it from everywhere, healthcare is an economic issue. But I certainly support reducing cost of housing, and I do recognize that disproportionately hits Black Texans.
Hey, this is my final question, and then we'll get to the very many that are in the queue. You kind of hit up on this a bit. The next topic is environmental justice. The godfather of the environmental justice movement, Dr. Robert Bullard, who is in Houston teaching at Texas Southern University, recently spoke in Dallas, a city that is really trying to battle some of the environmental injustices that are going on in Black and Latinx neighborhoods. If elected, what role do you see yourself playing, not only on global warming issues, but specifically about this type of systemic racism?
So climate change is one of my top issues, but I do often say that we don't talk enough about the other environmental issues as well, climate change being the most important one, but these other environmental issues that I just touched on, things like, Hurricane Harvey relief and communities, Black and Brown Texas communities are the hardest hit, and then they are also the slowest to get any kind of recovery or aid. There is aid at the state that hasn't been sent out to, local law enforcement or local communities and leaders in Houston, for example. So, it's environmental racism. We have to make sure that we are not centering factories in places that spew and damage the air and the water quality around Black and Brown communities. There is so much research on this. It's very clear. It's not something that John Cornyn can deny. And he keeps saying he doesn't think systemic racism exists. If you're watching, John, this topic that we're talking about, this type of environmental racism, is what we're talking about when we say systemic racism. So, I think that we have a real obligation to call it out. I think that elected officials need to be held accountable for their rhetoric and for their lack of action in this area.
Okay, so now we'll get to some of the many questions in the queue. You kind of touched on this a little bit, but maybe go a little bit more into it. What initiatives do you propose to help small businesses continue and thrive, particularly during COVID?
So there's so many policies that we need to go in and try to undo some of the damage that's been done. We were just talking about housing, and I'm thinking about redlining. When I say access to business capital, when on the debate stage last weekend, I tried to explain to John Cornyn that systemic racism, I just mentioned the PPP loans and lack of access to that. But this lack of access to business capital and the ability to promote minority small business owners and small business creation is very Texas. It's a gateway to building generational wealth for your families. We just need to support both education, but also the systems that are in place. When those minority-owned business leaders didn't get a lot of PPP loans, it wasn't because it was because of a lack of access to networks and relationships with accountants and attorneys and things like that. And so we need to be supporting talking directly to Black and minority-owned businesses. And I was just in, oh my gosh, it's all starting to merge together. I was just in Houston talking to Black business owners and restaurateurs and owners of bars about how they're handling COVID and what we need to do to bring them back. We just need leaders that are going to show up and listen and not just nod their heads and take pictures and then go back to DC and take no action. We really need to work on, healthcare disparities is probably the top thing that infiltrates everything else, because how do you work and feed your family when you are dealing with underlying conditions and more susceptible to COVID and things like that?
So the next question is talking about education. Question is from our audience: Betsy DeVos has been a disaster for Black children. What will be your educational priority?
Mm-hmm. Oh, what will be my educational priority?
Yes.
Okay. Well, we need to remove racial barriers to quality education. Success shouldn't be determined by your zip code. We have to invest in quality public education across the state, not just in areas that have high property taxes. We have to bridge the digital divide for Black and Brown students that lack access to laptops or don't have reliable Wi-Fi, that are disproportionately falling behind in school. We need to support local school systems that are taking steps to replace practices like one of my pet peeves, which is suspensions for willful defiance, which is an inherently subjective term that has been very clearly demonstrated that it risks letting implicit bias dictate punishment and disproportionately impacts young Black girls. We should end for-profit student loan practices that target low-income students, and I don't think the government should be profiting off a student loan interest. But if we're going to finally achieve America's potential, then that means that we have to ensure that those that work hard can actually make it in this country. I mean, that's supposed to be what makes us the leaders of the free world, and the American dream is part of what makes us so strong.
All right. Switching gears a little bit here. Question says, if elected, you will bring several new things to the Senate, most importantly, an understanding of tech. How would you address our vanishing privacy?
Well, I think that my time working in the tech industry will serve me well. I do think we lag and we tend to legislate challenges that have already exposed so many Americans to whatever the issue that the legislation is trying to fix, and tech is certainly one of those. We need to hold social media accountable for spreading, racist and hateful rhetoric. I do think that that's starting to happen now. We're starting to see Facebook recently banning anything that's supporting Holocaust deniers and things like that. But there is so much anti-immigration and so much racist rhetoric. White nationalism is the FBI has deemed it as the greatest threat. I agree with that. We have to hold social media accountable for that. But specifically for privacy, I think that that we have to legislate what is done with our information. I mean, we saw it in the 2016 election, and with how much of our personal information was like harvested and used against us to spread misinformation. So we just have to start electing people that don't just have one silo of experience, but have a breadth of experience. Net neutrality needs to be protected. I worked in tech, I worked in the military, but I also worked for 5 years in healthcare. And we just need more people who have faced the challenges of regular everyday Texans and Americans, and be able to take those experiences with them to DC. I do think that we should regulate the internet like it's a public utility, by the way. So I think that there's a lot of work in this space that can be done.
Okay, next question. Please share how your medical policy plan is more effective than Obamacare.
Oh, well, first, I think we need to protect Obamacare. It's being attacked left and right. The Republicans couldn't tear it down legislatively, so they're attacking it in the courts. There is so much that's helping regular, everyday Texans from Obamacare. And I was working in healthcare during the implementation of the Affordable Care Act. But I do think we need to move to a public option. I would like to see everybody have access to the type of healthcare I had when I was on TRICARE, which is basically military Medicare. But the reason that I'm for a public option is because I'm also for protecting people's right to choose what that access to quality, affordable healthcare means for them and their families. There's a lot of people who really like their plans. If any Republican is a true capitalist, then they should welcome competition. And I believe a public option would really make private insurance have to serve us, their customers, better and lower costs and make things more efficient. And they'll get called out and have no customers if they do things like what John Cornyn wants them to be able to do, which is discriminate against people with pre-existing conditions, and more specifically, discriminate against covering those pre-existing conditions.
All right, here's a quick question. In one word,
Okay.
even 1 minute, one word. Who are you voting for in the presidential election?
Biden. I'd like to say Biden-Harris, but that's 2 words.
Is a one-word question.
Okay, Biden.
All right, next question. If elected, what will be your first legislative priority?
Healthcare reform. I do believe that we cannot get the action that we need on healthcare reform, on aggressive action on climate change, on immigration reform, on gun violence, on tackling systemic racism, and all of the things that we really need to do and to prioritize until we end Citizens United and get corporate PAC money out of politics. I mean, a lot of John Cornyn's failures are because he's answering to his corporate, bosses, and he's their lapdog. So healthcare reform is my top legislative priority, but just know that no matter what I'm working on, I am going to be simultaneously working on ending corruption and the corrupting influence of corporate PAC money in politics.
Question here, we're going to move to the judiciary. What is your position on the Supreme Court justice appointment, judicial appointment that is currently under consideration? Which, folks who don't know, those things started today.
Yeah, I mean, I mentioned that they couldn't break down the Affordable Care Act legislatively, so now they're trying to do it judicially, and they've been pretty open about hoping that this appointment will help them do that. And then they criticize, us for wanting to appoint judges that will legislate from the bench. I don't think either party should appoint judges that will legislate from the bench, but this judicial nominee in particular has already made her opinion of the Affordable Care Act very clear, and I do think that she will vote to tear it down. And so I'm worried about the nearly 2 million Texans that are about to lose their health care. But my position on the Supreme Court is, I do think Supreme Court justices, in addition to the federal court justices, should have term limits, which we would need longer to go into, I guess. But I do think that this is unprecedented. They can act like it's, different from 2016. They're right. This is different from when they tried to block President Obama's nominee in 2016. The American people are currently casting ballots. It's ridiculous that they are showing a sense of urgency toward rushing through this nomination, and no sense of urgency in another COVID-19 relief package. They have completely lost touch with the challenges and the fears and the suffering of regular people. Mitch McConnell said he didn't want to do another COVID relief package until after the election, but he forgets that rent is due on the 1st. And I guess maybe he's never had that challenge, but I have.
Another education question here. What is your position on public education, specifically regarding the use of school vouchers?
I am a proud product of public education, and I don't support vouchers. I support some charter schools if we can make sure that they are answerable and equal and have the same standards and aren't able to pick and choose their students. I'm all for choice, but actual student or school vouchers is not choice. It's discrimination painted as choice, and I'm not for anything that rips away funding from public schools.
Question. Are you in support of defunding the police and legalization of prostitution and marijuana?
I'm sorry. No, I do not support defunding the police. I do think that people like John Cornyn need to listen to their constituents when they call for something like that and go into these communities and say, where is this coming from, and develop a better understanding, because I've done that. And now that I've done that, I have a better understanding that people who are calling for that, what they mean is their taxpayer dollars are going to something that they can't utilize, that they don't feel safe to pick up the phone and call 911 when they're in distress. That's what we need to fix. We need to fix that relationship and make sure every American and every Texan does feel like they can pick up the phone and call 911 in distress. We're always going to need somebody to be on the other end of that phone when we pick it up. I have been a first responder before. I have pulled the trigger in the line of duty as a first responder when I was in the military as a medevac pilot. And so I understand the challenges of our men and women in uniform, and I think we need to hold ourselves to a high standard, and we need to take a very strong look at policing reform, making sure we have police officers that are not performing as mental health and social workers. And if we can alleviate some of the load off of law enforcement for that, that's more appropriate for mental health professionals and social workers. I stand with the police unions that are calling for that, by the way. Some police unions actually are contributing to the problem through making it harder to get rid of bad actors and things like that. I am not going to acknowledge the prostitution. I'm sorry, we don't have enough time. And that's something that John Cornyn's been pushing as a conspiracy theory. I've never said that I'm for that. I am for legalizing marijuana and decriminalizing it. I mean, if we legalize it, it's decriminalized, but not only is it good for treating things like PTSD and would replace a lot of the opioid addiction that we have. I worked in the counter drug task force for 3 years. I know how keeping it illegal just fuels cartels, and we could be reaping tax benefits from it. We could regulate it like tobacco, and the criminalization of marijuana has had a disproportionate effect on communities of color and have increased our hyper incarceration rate. We also need to end private prisons.
Next question. Texas is known for low voter turnout. What is your campaign doing to change that?
Yeah, we've been 49th or 50th in voter turnout for a long time. And I grew up here, and I was part of that problem. I voted in every presidential election and most midterms, some of whom I was, deployed with the military or stationed overseas and voted by mail. But I understand the apathy. It comes from people feeling like their vote doesn't matter or their voice isn't heard. And I've been there. I went to DC as a private citizen, took time off my job to go to my government and say, this is not, this policy keeping jobs closed to women in the military is hurting our military. And when I got there, I did not feel listened to. It's part of why I'm running. So what we can do is, stop letting people run on fear, stop giving fear a platform, make sure that we run on, what we can do, the impact that we can have on the lives of regular, everyday Texans in the Black community in particular. I think that we really, I mentioned earlier, not just ask for people's votes, but earn them. I've been working closely with Black leaders, with the Sheila Jackson Lee and Edie Bernice Johnson and Mark Vesey and Colin
Right.
Allred. And
Next question.
Oh.
I heard the buzzer. Sorry.
Sorry.
Next question.
sorry.
And this is like a 5-part question, so I'm gonna pick it apart a little bit. What is your plan for, if you could be specific, please, for investment in the African American community? What is your plan for investment in the African American community?
Well, I think we have to start with investment in Black voter outreach. And we are spending 7 figures on digital mail, Black papers, including the Dallas Examiner, Black radio across the state, partnering with the TDP. I feel like you can predict how somebody's going to act in office by how they act on their way to that office. And so we have a huge investment in Black communities right now with trying to turn out the vote and make sure that we hear from Black voters. I also feel like, I'm sorry. So the question was the investment in the Black community.
Yes.
I believe that goes to probably my top 3, although I would say 4 would be environmental racism and doing something about that. But investing in the Black community, more resources available for education, a commitment to fixing the healthcare disparities and specifically, of course, the maternal mortality rate. And did I say education, healthcare, environmental, and then small business capital, access to small business capital resources for minority-owned businesses and those that would want to start a business.
So you mentioned a little earlier when I asked a housing question, and here's a follow-up question from someone else. What plan do you have to increase wages and lower the cost of housing to the extent that that's hurting people?
I think we have to increase wages. I think that I support things like the Raise the Wage Act. I work with unions on how do we get, and business leaders. It's important that we bring, small business owners and business leaders to the table as well in this conversation on how we do this responsibly. So I support raising the minimum wage, and I think that we should be incentivizing businesses that are treating people well. And I'm a bigger carrot person than I am stick, but we have to have that stick and we have to regulate for people that aren't doing the right thing. I think that some companies are, we need to make sure that corporations are paying their fair share and treating people well. I think that we see things like Amazon paying less in taxes than we are, and that's a problem. I think that smarter people than I was just on a town hall last night with Secretary Castro, who, has worked extensively in this area. I, as somebody who's not the expert in housing, would go to him and get his voice in helping me develop that plan, as well as Black leaders, so that I can tell you that I want to do that. The specifics on how we can do that, I think making sure that we have a strong economy, making sure that we incentivize, making sure that we provide resources, and making sure that we are able to see and remove systemic racism when and where we can, like redlining and things like that.
A couple more questions before we transition. Question, Mr. Trump has taken diversity and inclusion training out of governmental entities. What are your thoughts?
Oh, I think it's a huge mistake. Whether it was in the military or working in healthcare or on my team, I did Leadership Austin and we did a lot of implicit bias training. I feel like when people like John Cornyn say systemic racism doesn't exist, it's from a real lack of understanding and self-reflection. And that self-reflection has to be guided. It can't just be, you know, you sitting in a room on your own. I mean, on the debate stage, he did some self-reflection and decided he wasn't a racist. You know, I think that we need to acknowledge problems if we are going to tackle them. And this type of training is important. And I think that hiding from the things that we're not proud of is not the answer, but actually educating ourselves and becoming more self-aware so that we can understand how that implicit bias impacts us is really critical to moving forward as a country.
Alrighty. So final question here, and you can prepare your closing and put whatever topic you want or all topics in your closing.
Okay.
Final question here from the audience. It's an education question. What is your position on universal pre-K?
Oh, I am for universal pre-K. I think that, you know, if you hear any hesitance, we have to make sure that we're able to. I just want to be careful. I'm not over promising. I want to get to a place where we have universal pre-K. I have a 3 and a 5-year-old. Oh my gosh, I have a 6-year-old. He just turned 6. He just lost his first tooth, by the way, last night. So pre-K is so important. Access to pre-K not only helps working parents, but kids that show up to kindergarten behind their peers have such a hard time catching up that it's a disservice to economically disadvantaged communities and families, but it's really a disservice to our country as well. So, you know, I am a passionate believer in access to quality pre-K. I've been working with education leaders like Miguel Solis on this. It's definitely something that as a working mom, when I say we need to elect people that have faced the challenges of everyday working people, this is part of what I'm talking about is when you elect a bunch of people who haven't stepped outside of their little, you know, bubble of privilege and protection to understand how challenging it can be to find and afford quality pre-K. You know, they really shouldn't be in a position, only them, to legislate solutions to the challenges that we're facing every day.
And so now we'll move to your closing statements for 2 minutes. Go right ahead.
Thank you. As I said earlier, you know, it's so important that, you know, in light of everything that's happened this year, especially, that we earn Black Texans votes. And I am committed to doing that. I'm committed to doing everything that I can to earn every single vote. And that fight doesn't stop on election day. It carries into how I will lead as a U.S. Senator from Texas and how I will represent us. You know, I will fight to make sure Black Texans have the support to make it through and recover from this pandemic, for action to be taken to address systemic racism and hold those accountable that deny its existence, and for every Black child to grow up into a country that values their lives and provides them the opportunity for success. The opportunity is all that we're asking. And that change, though, it doesn't happen with just me, which is why we are committed to running a strong, coordinated campaign, highlighting the work of amazing candidates up and down the ballot, from statewide to local, congressional, state house. We've got some Texas tough servant leaders running, people like Kayla Alex and Kiki Williams and Candace Valenzuela. You know, I hope that you guys seek out these down ballot candidates and support them as well. But I could use your support. I can't do this alone, but I need your support, not just during the election, but afterwards, as I try to make sure that we can provide good representation to this amazingly diverse and strong state. So thank you so much for your time tonight.
Thank you. Thank you for being here. We appreciate it. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Demetria. Take care.
Folks, take care. All right, folks, we are moving to our next race. So I'm going to unmute those candidates and have them start their videos. All right, so there we are. So we have Judge Marcella Moore and Jordan Lewis, who are running for judicial seats here in the state of Texas. So we're going to, just as a recap, there's a 2-minute opening each, 2-minute closing each, and questions for 1 minute. I believe you've heard what the buzzer sounds like. Sometimes you have to strain to hear a little bit, but I'll help you with that part. And we'll go in alphabetical order. So we'll start with opening statements from Jordan Lewis. And when we do get to closing statements, we'll start closing statements with Judge Moore. Sound right, everybody?
Sounds good.
So right now, I'm going to ask Judge Moore, would you please mute your video while we hear the opening statements of Mr. Lewis? And if my timekeeper is ready, we will pass the floor over to Mr. Lewis. It's all yours.
Thank you so much. I truly appreciate being invited to be with you this evening. I have to commend your organization for facilitating the opportunity to meet the candidates. It really is a civic duty, and we are blessed to have you doing this for all Dallas sites across our county. I think it's important to understand first why I'm even on the ballot. Judge Moore is a good judge, and she's been a great lawyer through her career. I'm not here to tear her down today. I just want you to know that you're not going to hear that from me. Instead, I personally have a different vision, and I would like you to hear my vision. I'd like you to consider it for yourselves and for your families and for the people that you care about within your communities. Because for far too long, my understanding as a citizen has been that the courts have been inaccessible. They're frightening to the average citizen, and they're not something that you believe you can go into without attaining some sort of harm to yourself, your finances, potentially to your credibility, definitely to the people around you and your family. And I think that's unfortunate. I don't think it's Judge Moore's fault at all. I'm just an average person. I grew up, I was actually homeless for 4 years. I spent about 8 years in poverty. I was in a single home. I grew up, I was actually the child of an attorney, but he wasn't involved in my family as a child. I'm thankful that ultimately as an adult, I was able to forgive him, and he was able to come into my life, and we had reconciliation. And I'm thankful that I've been able to be at peace with all the issues in my family that have arisen. But eventually God, led us through that, and I was able to, go to college, and I was able to get my master's degree in business. I was a small business owner, self-employed for a while. I worked for a culinary arts institute that gave me a chance to work there at the lowest level. And eventually, by the time I left 4 years later, we had transformed the institution in Baton Rouge into something international, ranked 14th internationally in the large school. I'm running for judge because you need a choice in Dallas County, and I have been a lawyer here and have a family here, and I would like your vote. Thank you so much.
Thank you. If you would mute your video, please, Mr. Lewis, while we do openings from Judge Moore and Judge Moore. All right, the floor is yours.
Good evening, and it is so good to be back with you. I have had the opportunity to speak with you in previous campaign cycles, and I share Mr. Lewis's commendation for the work you're doing to educate the community about who we are as candidates. My name is Judge Madi Salamor. I've presided over this particular court for the past 4 years, and I have been very humbled by the opportunity to serve, and I look forward to continuing to do so. I think it's important as you look at the candidates to take a look at what kind of court this is and who brings the kind of experience that will make this court remain one of the most efficient, open, and respected courts that are in the entire county. I am honored to say that among all of the judges, I have one of the highest ratings of any judge. I think Mr. Lewis properly stated that I am very well regarded in my neutrality, my approach to the bench, the work that I provide. And I do agree with Mr. Lewis that these are courts, and I think if you look at who I am and what I've done prior to serving on the bench, I tried cases. I tried specific court. I'm the only candidate who can say that. I represented individuals who were seeking justice in the civil courts system. After working for many years at one of the largest international law firms called Baker McKenzie, I left that practice to devote my entire legal profession to representing individuals who sought justice from workplace harassment and discrimination and mistreatment. I provided that kind of access that Mr. Lewis just mentioned, where people who were not being treated fairly could come to court and have an attorney represent them, although they did not have the financial resources. I took those cases and we shared in the risk, and we were able to successfully work to defend the rights of working people who need access to our civil courts. So I understand that need, but I can demonstrate through action that I've done what is needed to preside over this particular court. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. And Mr. Lewis, you may unmute yourself. There
Thank
you
you.
go. Okay, so a question we've asked when we looked at other judicial candidates, and folks, just for the record, they're running for judicial positions in the state court system, right? That's separate and apart from the federal court system, all right? So now these are not lifetime appointments, ergo they are running for office. But understand and tell the folks that you know to understand that in the state of Texas, you must now select every single candidate that you like to vote for. You can't just pick some party and vote for a whole bunch of people. So I'm going to advise that you listen closely so that you can decide on an individual basis, not just for these particular candidates, but for all of the races that are taking place beyond the presidency. So now with that being said, we're going to take this in reverse alphabetical order, so Ms. Judge Moore could respond first. The question is, in the criminal context, there's this right to legal counsel, right? The Gideon right. Obviously, we don't have that as it relates to a civil context. What is your position about access to the courts? And you both kind of hinted on the issue of access to the courts. If for some meteor hit and we actually had an opportunity to change the Constitution, and the question was on the floor about whether or not there should be a civil Gideon right, what is your position on that topic?
Well, I think that is a concern within the civil court system. The accessibility to courts is related to the affordability of litigation, and it is something that, as the presiding judge, I do work to ensure that those that cannot afford legal representation have access to such services. And I'd like to give a specific example. There is a program that the Dallas Bar Association began just last year that I, in coordination with their leadership, have been instrumental in growing. And it's an entrepreneurship program, which is a great idea. The idea is that the Dallas Bar Association basically incubates young graduates from law school who want to start their own legal practice. The challenge by doing that is that if you go to work for yourself, you don't have any mentorship. Who teaches you all the skills of knowing how to practice law? And what the program is set up to do is provide mentorship. I'm their liaison with the judiciary, so that we bring these young, newly graduated law students who are coming to the practice of law to the courthouse, so you can learn about the legal system. In exchange, those that are participants in the system agree to provide 200 hours of what is called low bono or pro bono work. So it's a great partnership where seasoned attorneys and judges provide mentorship and skills to young lawyers, and those young lawyers then turn around and provide legal representation to those that cannot afford to hire a lawyer. I have not only supported the program, but I've had great opportunity to bring those lawyers into my court by partnering them with individuals who need representation. I had one specific example of a young lady who could not afford a lawyer, and she was in a motor vehicle accident, and she was just trying to navigate the system. The case was not so complex that it required that she spend lots of time and money, but what she did need was a lawyer. And I was able to work with the Dallas Bar Association and partner her with one of these young lawyers that had this responsibility and also the opportunity to provide no-cost legal services. And so she was able to get a lawyer, and the lawyer was able to get experience. And those kind of partnerships between the judiciary and the Bar Association are exactly what we need to be looking at as a way to provide more representation to individuals who cannot afford legal representation in our civil system.
Mr. Lewis, you're given 2 minutes to respond.
Thank you. First and foremost, I think there's just a governing principle that a person should be able to get justice in the courts, whether or not they can get the best representation or any representation at all. Whether you have the most persuasive lawyer or the highest paid lawyer or the lawyer who contributed the most or no lawyer at all. If you find yourself in court, you should be able to get access to justice. And all those programs that Judge Moore have discussed are good. And in fact, I served on several pro bono organizations trying to put together a pro bono program for the bankruptcy section here in Dallas. And we were able to put together a pro bono program for what are called adversary proceedings for discharge. But the problem that you run into is that you need a driver, an economic driver, to make sure that you have enough lawyers who are licensed, who are going to commit themselves full time to actually representing the people. And when it's at the bottom of their pile, when it is, when it's not paying anything, or it's too risky, or things like that, you're not going to get enough people to do that. On the other hand, I have seen a model that's been pretty effective over on the criminal side. This is a civil court, not the criminal side, but the DA's office has long had a mentorship program where it would pay a lower rate for new lawyers and for lawyers from out of town to get their feet under them within the community a lot of times. And those lawyers would then spend some time there and then move on, but they were able to, while they were under that tutelage, devote themselves full time. And so I've kind of advocated for a low bono program, very similar in some ways to what Judge Moore has tried to initiate, but it would essentially be an opt-in program for young lawyers right out of law school, where they would agree to a set rate, and they would proceed for the indigent and for those who are in need of inexpensive legal counsel under the opt-in, but they would fully participate through the entire program, and they would gain experience. And they would do so like the DVAT program, like the program that Judge Moore has discussed, with mentors. So it's more of a free market type solution to the program. That the court would not be mandating anything, or the bar being the one to preside over it, because historically speaking, we just haven't seen the meaningful response from the bar with those programs. A lot of people, the young attorneys, are afraid of the risk. They want to jump under the auspices of the law firms that are going to ensure that they have everything that they need to be protected long term. So we need an opportunity for them to take what is equivalent to contract work, working for the court. And we've seen lots of young lawyers in this new economy for lawyers who have taken on contract work at extremely low rates. I've had young lawyers that I personally know take on jobs for $10, $15 an hour, engaging in contract work. They're licensed, they're capable. The state says that they're able to take on those cases, and we should give them the opportunity. Thank you very much.
Thank you. All right, so our question here that we have up on the board, and we'll begin with Mr. Lewis and we'll go to Judge Moore, and you will have 2 minutes each for these questions.
Thank you.
What do you think the plan should be, or how would you handle the caseload post-COVID? And embedded in that is the assumption is that the caseload is higher because of the pandemic.
Understood. Yes, absolutely. Well, first of all, I think that the hiatus on jury trials and on the courts in general really created a bottleneck, and I think that that's a danger to our society. I mean, to be blunt, I think that when your day in court is delayed, ultimately justice is delayed. And for a lot of people, they're going to court not because they want to. It's not just some commercial litigants who are there to try to get some insurance policy funded. Instead, a lot of times it's people who've been devastated. They've been devastated by the bad acts of the other party, or some sort of some issue that they can't resolve any other way. People don't like to go to court, and if they do have to go to court, it's usually very meaningful to them. And so delaying it indefinitely has been a major problem. So first and foremost, I think we need to institute meaningful steps to get the infrastructure ready to make sure that it is a safe environment, and immediately begin doing these trials as quickly as possible, going back. And I think that those steps have begun, but I think they should have happened a little bit sooner. And secondly, I think that we need to institute technology for, these aren't things necessarily that the judges can do on their own. They're things that have to be systematically worked on, but I think we need to look at whether we can use technology for our jury pools, and ensuring that we have, that we can maybe do some jury selection through technology, and that we can begin to proceed with moving those cases along as quickly as possible. Thank you.
Judge Moore.
Oh boy, well this is a big topic, and I have a lot to say, so I'll try to make it as brief as possible. So, in addition to presiding over the 162nd District Court, I also preside over civil jury services. And I have worked night and day to try to come up with the best solution to do a little bit of what Mr. Lewis said, which is bring juries back into the courthouse. But we cannot do that without having a plan that ensures safety and the health of those that are called to serve. I am a huge proponent of the 7th Amendment. I am a big believer in a jury of our peers. But I'm also a believer that we have a responsibility as the presiding judges to ensure the health and safety of those who are called to serve in our courthouse. And it has not been time yet. I have worked side by side with Judge Jenkins and Dr. Huang and others in Dallas County to develop a plan to bring back juries. And I'm very excited to announce tonight that this week we are, for the first time since March, going to mail out 2,000 summons that will go out to jurors to serve in civil trials in the George Allen Courthouse. This is a plan that I have been working very hard to put together. The idea is something that has not been done anywhere in the state of Texas. I'm not sure if the rest of the country has tried it, but it's certainly novel here. And this is what we're going to do. We are going to pre-register those individuals who receive the summons, make sure that they're safe, they're healthy, they feel comfortable serving on jury duty, because that is absolutely the most important responsibility that we have. Then what we're going to do is we are going to conduct the jury selection process. So those who have done their great civic duty and have served on a jury, when you would come down to a big central jury room and be among 450 of your new best friends, rather than do that in the courthouse, we're going to do that virtually. So that I'm going to conduct the first pilot trial, which will be in my courtroom, and we're going to do a jury selection with the jurors appearing on a video conference to ensure their health and safety. So we don't bring large masses of people down to the courthouse because it's not yet time to do that. But once those jurors go through the jury selection process and the judge, which will be me in this particular pilot project, swears in the jurors, those jurors who are selected to serve will come down and they will appear in person. But we have protocols in place. We have safety in place. We are not going to bring hundreds and hundreds of people as we've seen in these crazy rallies and irresponsible gatherings. Dallas County is not going to do that. We're only going to bring down to the courthouse those that are called on to serve and have been sworn in. And the idea is, as Judge Jenkins put it, you only bring the essential people. Kind of like the NBA doesn't have their fans. They're not essential. We don't necessarily need hundreds of people coming into the courthouse. That's not essential. What we're hoping to do in the short term is bring together in a safe manner a jury that will then begin to serve so we can get these trials back on track. Now, I will say there has been a little bit of a delay because we haven't had trials, but I give my colleagues and also myself a lot of credit. There isn't the kind of backlog that you've seen in other counties. I conduct sometimes as many as 5 or 6 hours of video conference hearings every single day. I've done over a dozen non-jury trials. We're continuing to work, but there is definitely work to be done.
All right, that sounds like time. We have a question in the queue here. And we'll start with Judge Moore and move to Mr. Lewis this time. What are the main points you want voters to remember about your goals for your time in office?
So, boy, there is so much that I want to accomplish. But the most important goal that I have and what I'm looking to achieve is I want to continue to work to increase the show rate of jurors that are called on to serve. I am an adamant believer in the 7th Amendment. And right now, only 18% of those who receive a summons come down to serve on jury duty. I'm working with Dallas County to bring better technology to the system so that we can have a more efficient jury system. I'm working with the community. I'm working to educate about the importance of jury duty. And I am committed to ensuring that we can work to be one of the best counties in the state of Texas so that we have a higher show rate. Because juror show rate is directly affiliated and will reflect a more diverse jury pool if you have more people that appear. So if only 18% of those that are summoned are coming down, we are not providing necessarily, in all cases, an adequate jury of our peers. We should and we can do better than that. And as the presiding judge of the 162nd, I am committed to working hard to ensure that we have a more efficient and a better jury selection process so that we have more diverse jury pools and we have a better experience for those that come down to serve on jury duty. There's a lot that I love to do in my court. I feel so honored and humbled to serve, but specifically my work with juries is the goal that I hope people will watch to see how I am moving the needle in the right direction.
Mr. Lewis.
Yeah, I agree with Judge Moore, and I think it's important to make sure we have greater participation among the juries that show. I actually have been a bit in shock that we've suspended our Seventh Amendment rights for so long. I don't quite understand that. But moving on, with respect to juries, I would hope that we would incentivize employers, not incentivize. I think we need to make it very clear to employers that their employees are going to have to come to jury, that there can't be any reprisals or retribution against people who participate on a jury. So what if it's a month-long trial? This is an important civic duty. I think we need to talk about civics at a young age again, so that people understand why it's important. And I also think that we need to incentivize, we need to have juries paid more. We need to do something, whether it's at a higher level of jurisdictional amount. We charge a jury fee that's higher in order to pay juries more. But I think that all of those things are devastating for two-parent earners or single parents who are called to serve on a jury, and their ability to actually do that is almost impossible with what we currently pay juries and what we expect of them, sometimes for a month at a time. Moving on, I'm just a family man who I clerked for a federal judge after law school. I served in various nonprofits as I practiced here. My entire practice, I believe that as much as I was given, I need to share it with others, that I need to pay it forward. And so I've always spent a lot of time. I'm exhausted with my 4 kids, also trying to help as many people as possible, often not for pay, just to make sure that they are cared for. It's a gift that I was given to be able to practice law here. And I know that it is frightening to be able to try to use the courts to accomplish anything, but I've served in nonprofits such as Advocates for Community Transformation that used civil courts, such as Judge Moore's, the 162nd, in order to make communities better. They taught people about how nuisance actions and the rights and obligations of citizens can be used to make neighborhoods better. We got lawyers and community leaders and neighborhood churches and HOAs and to just get together out in the light and deal with real problems in places such as West and South Dallas. And I've always served in these nonprofits. I'm on the board of New Friends, New Life, men's advocacy group fighting against sex trafficking. But I ran because that's not enough. I need to step into, we need some leadership. We need some options in terms of these issues. Our public needs to be educated, needs to be better off when I'm done. It needs to know, hey, I've got a real issue in my community. I need to be able to resolve it. And I don't know how to do that. How do I deal with this drug house or this flop house? Why is someone shooting guns outside my door? Why am I having issues with landlord issues? All of these things, the public can be educated and empowered. And that would be the legacy I would hope to instill. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, next question here in the queue is, if asked, would you conduct a same-sex marriage ceremony? Do you feel that partners are deserving of benefits in these relationships? And we'll start with Mr. Lewis on that one.
That's a great question. I actually have to say that I know it's my duty under my law, but I would, under the law, and I would simply have to execute my constitutional right that I believe to say no. I would actually have to stand aside.
Judge Moore?
Absolutely. Yes, I would, and I have conducted marriage ceremonies. I've conducted marriage ceremonies in my court of same-sex couples. I've conducted marriage ceremonies of people who only speak Spanish. That is a personal decision, and I am honored when anyone comes to me and asks me to be part of such a beautiful representation of love and life. You know, I am humbled by the power and authority that the state of Texas grants to me. And it is moving for me to be the part of anyone's life in any particular matter, whether it's in some kind of a case or something as beautiful as individuals coming and asking to stand in front of me and to be a part of that beautiful comment about their devotion to each other. And so absolutely, there is no doubt that is not only something I would do. For those of you who are out there, whoever needs somebody, please, I would be honored. I'm always really humbled by that opportunity. I even had one true story where there was a woman on the way to have her baby, literally was like her water broke when they needed to get married. And they came and they wanted the ceremony in Spanish, and I did it. And you know, that's the beauty of public service, is you get to touch people's lives. So absolutely, without a doubt, I would and have conducted same-sex marriage ceremonies.
Okay, so next question. America is getting to pay attention and see a lot of the process as we go through these hearings regarding the federal U.S. Supreme Court, okay, candidate. Question to you, both of you, and we'll start with Ms. Moore. What case, be it state or federal, do you think the highest court of the land got wrong, and why? And we'll start with Ms. Moore and move to Mr. Lewis.
Wow. Well, you know, I mean, that's
either the Texas Supreme Court or the U.S. Supreme Court. What case do you think the court got wrong? And please explain to our audience, who are not necessarily lawyers, why you think they got it wrong.
You know, I think that there are a number of cases starting with the U.S. Supreme Court, I will say, that reflect a misunderstanding of the law. And there are things going back to voting rights. I mean, I'd rather not just talk about one. I'd rather talk about concepts that I think were in time have been incorrect, have been recognized as being incorrect. I think that there is a challenge in our law when judges take specific cases, and you know, it's interesting to me when the idea of and this has come up a lot. I was watching the hearings this morning, when this idea of whether or not there is a direct interpretation of the Constitution or some liberal-minded way of looking at it. And what I find in cases that I think sometimes are incorrectly decided is that judges conveniently, I think, will say, well, I am literally interpreting what the Constitution says. The Constitution does not literally state that there is a right to marry someone of a different race, or there is not a constitutional right to marry a same-sex person. And so they conveniently find that is not recognized by law. Thankfully, in this last term, there was a recognition that a lot of the rights, particularly transgender, do exist. But in history, I think that what we have seen, whether it's voting rights or individual rights, there is this desire by judges to make decisions that I think perhaps in a conservative way agree with their stance on something, and they then shy away and say, well, the Constitution doesn't give that particular right. And so there are a number of circumstances. The Texas Supreme Court has done the same. We have had an incredibly conservative Supreme Court that I think has taken a very narrow-minded interpretation of rights because it's convenient to their political stripe. And so, you know, it is disturbing for me to see, because I am more of an academic. I think that there has been a politicalization of a number of different decisions that fall within legal mantra.
I believe that was the time.
I think so. Sorry.
Mr. Lewis, your turn.
Minutes. It's a big question.
Judge Moore, I'm not going to interrupt you, just to be clear. So I think that it's a great question. I think going to my answer previously, whenever people have differences of, you know, they have sincere religious convictions, and they're serving in public office, I think that there's some opinions recently where those people have been, you know, forced basically to their religious convictions were basically set aside, and they weren't allowed to simply defer and say, hey, you know, my faith, which I am very convicted about it, requires me to behave in a certain way, and so I simply can't perform this particular thing. And ironically, when the law was, when they got into office, the law was one way, and because of a Supreme Court opinion, the law was not overturned, which is really the appropriate function of the Supreme Court. It was the law of the state was almost rewritten in effect, and that's kind of where we live in this day and age. The Texas, the United States Supreme Court, with some of its recent holdings, hasn't done what courts do, which is decide whether something is constitutional or unconstitutional, but have in fact placed in new laws into effect, or necessitated new laws by their opinions that have in effect created societal change despite the people's voice. Now, again, I'm not, I just want to say very clearly, like, I have no problem with I believe that all people, regardless of their sexual identity or their preferences, whatever that is, are entitled to the same rights under the Constitution as everyone. And I, in no way, am trying to suggest that there's hatred for anyone. I don't feel that way. But what I'm trying to say is that I have a personal conviction, and I should be allowed to practice my faith without fear of reprisal. And I think recently there have been some cases where there's been reprisal against people. And I know that there's some limitations. I'm not trying to say in every circumstance, we as a civil and just society have to come to terms with what to do with sincere people of faith and an ever-changing society. Thank you.
Thank you. Next question here in the box here is, in the Q&A box here is, and we'll start with Mr. Lewis. I heard one of the candidates use the word silly, referring to the Black Lives Matter movement marches. That's a tongue twister. The question is, what are your thoughts on what is being demanded by the Black Lives Matter movement?
So this is a great question. I think that it is a shame that we have people in this country who have been made to believe that they were less or treated like they were less for a long period of time. And in fact, we're made less under the law. It's a shame. And it still exists today. It is ridiculous for anyone to suggest otherwise. And we do have to address that. On the other hand, I think that what we've seen now is a lot of anger that it doesn't have any real outlet. We've had a lot of great opportunities for those outlets, and those have been glossed over for some sort of nebulous, ineffable kind of change that is not, it doesn't really align with what's being asked for. We need to fight for one another, and we need to seek reconciliation. I agree absolutely with those people who are protesting and the right to protest. We absolutely need to do that. And but we have to find ways to come together as a community. I agree that those things are awful, but you and I need to understand each other. I am not against you. I don't hate you. I'm not trying to repress anyone down. And just because I have this skin color doesn't mean that I should be seen as your enemy. And that's what that's the whole point, is it's not silly, but we need to find something constructive to do together. And that's my position on it. And it is what it is.
Judge Moore.
Well, first of all, there is a real problem existing in this country. And anyone who does not believe that there is racism in this country is ignoring the reality of where we exist. This is been heightened by the lack of leadership at both the highest state and federal levels. That we are in an administration that encourages negativity and hate, and we are seeing a real result when you do not have real leadership. And people are angry, and they have a right to be, because there are people in this country who feel threatened by a system that does not treat them fairly. And this is not just a hyperbole belief, it is a reality. And so I agree with Mr. Lewis, we need to come together, but before we come together, we have to acknowledge there is a problem. There is racism in this country, and we have a president who wants it to increase because he believes that those negative feelings will encourage his base. And that in itself is a huge problem. And until we can acknowledge why it is so much worse, we cannot begin to come together, because people don't want to be just glossed over and to be told, try to find another way to communicate your concerns. First, you have to acknowledge there is a concern that exists because there are people who are taking advantage of the negative and the racism. It's a minority, I will say. It is not the majority of the feeling in this United States, but it is a true feeling and it is a true problem. And so I don't think that we can rush to criticize those that are frustrated because they are not being listened to. What we need to do is chastise the leadership of this country that will not condemn the negativity and the harsh reality that so many exist in this country, that there are two justice systems. There is a justice system that serves those with resources, and there is a justice system for the others. And anybody who doesn't believe that, I do not think is really looking at
That's
reality.
time there. All right, here's our final question before closing, and we'll start with Judge Moore. Question is this. There are a lot of people trying to appeal to, on the federal level, trying to appeal to the decision makers to appoint a Black female justice of the U.S. Supreme Court. Now, the question is this. Do you believe on any level, at any court level, JP or whatever, that a person's personal background has a role to play as they administer their responsibilities as a judge or justice?
I absolutely believe that the justice system is best served when there is a diversity within those presiding judges that reflect the community. Of the 13 civil district courts that currently are in existence, I'm the only Hispanic that serves. I'm the only bilingual on the court. I'm the first Latina ever to serve as a civil district court judge in Dallas County. Now, I don't believe that anybody should vote for me because I happen to be Hispanic, but I do believe that my culture and my background add a richness and a diversity to the court that is needed. I do think that the courts at the federal level and at the state level need to reflect those that they serve. And you cannot have a court system that simply does not reflect the diversity of the people and say, well, it doesn't really matter, because it does. It absolutely does. But I don't want my position to be confused with a check the box, so-and-so should just be appointed because they are of a certain race or ethnicity. You know, it's interesting, no one ever says that if an Anglo male is appointed, well, it's because they are an Anglo male. Well, you know, we have some really talented, qualified, Hispanic, African-American, Asian men and women who deserve to be presiding over the federal and the state benches. And so absolutely, do I think that that should be a consideration as the seats are now going to be filled as new opportunities come open? Absolutely. There's no reason why our benches, our courts, should not reflect those that they serve, because we have plenty of qualified, diverse individuals that could be the presiding officers of those courts. I'm proud to be one of very few Hispanics that serve. I wish there were more, but I'm proud to be. But it's not that I'm serving because I'm Hispanic, it's because I'm absolutely the most qualified person to preside over this court. Without a doubt, there is no question. I'm the only person who has, well, there goes my beeper.
All right. Mr. Lewis, same question.
Yeah, to answer your question succinctly, yes, I do think that a person's background, I think that's the right way of putting it, plays a significant role in their value on the court. And I think that we need someone who has the background of, you mentioned as an example, a Black woman Supreme Court justice would be who was of the highest caliber and who was qualified to be on that bench. If she were to be selected for it, I think that would be a phenomenal day for our country. And I look forward to it because I believe that it's going to happen. And I applaud Judge Moore for her own walk. And everyone has a story, and I appreciate her acknowledgement of, you know, everyone has their own story and they're unique. I will say this though, I mentored several Southern University Law Center law students while I was clerking for a federal judge. And as I was spending time with them, I was just amazed that I was sitting here with people who were taking on this dream and pursuing law, and then comparing it to my own class at SMU Law, and noticing that in my cohort of 70 students, there was only one African-American gentleman and no female law school students along with me. And it troubled me greatly. And I wondered about the existing kind of division there. And it definitely bothers me. We as a society need to address that. I'm pleased to see that HBCUs are getting federal funding on an equal footing with other colleges and universities. I hope that continues. But more importantly, I really look forward to that day. And I think that we're about ready for that day. So I'm excited about it.
Thank you. Thank you very much. So we're going to move now to closing statements. That'll be 2 minutes each. We began opening with Mr. Lewis, so we'll begin closing with Judge Moore. And so while they prepare for that, I'm going to give you and the audience a little homework. Write this down, put it in your phone, whatever. Look up Pauli Murray. Pauli Murray was an alumna of my law school, Howard University School of Law, and she was close friends with the late, great Justice Ginsburg. And she was very influential in some of the work Justice Ginsburg did. So in honor and in memory of Pauli Murray, I suggest everyone in our listening audience look up and learn a little bit about Pauli Murray. So now that I have my little soapbox, we'll move on to closing statements. If you would mute your video, please, Mr. Lewis. We'll get started with Ms. Moore, and I'll mute my video.
Well, this is going to take a couple of my minutes, but I wanted, Demetria, just to comment on what you just said. I'm right now reading the autobiography of Justice Ginsburg. It's in her own words, and she speaks of Pauli Murray in that book. So if you haven't picked up that book, it is a great read. I would highly recommend it. Let me just say, I so appreciate the fact that so many of you have taken time out on this Monday evening to talk with Mr. Lewis and me. It is absolutely imperative that we learn more about our judicial candidates. We don't get a lot of spotlight. There's not a lot of news. We don't have commercials. We're just not those kinds of candidates. But who we are, what we've done, what our experience is, and the kind of judge we will be is incredibly important. I commend to you that I have proven over the past 4 years to be a fair-minded judge who has the right temperament, the right educational and professional background to preside over this court. I try hundreds of jury trials, and I do it bringing the experience of representing both plaintiffs and defendants. I do it with the experience of winning and losing lawsuits in this particular court. I do this with the passion of public service. I am committed to remaining one of the hardest working and highest rated judges of Dallas County if I am given the opportunity to continue to serve. It is my professional highlight of all of the accolades and all of I've done over my past 20 years since I graduated from law school to be the presiding judge over this court. I absolutely love the work, and I do it passionately, and I do it with a commitment to quality and to service of the community, because that's what we need. We need judges who are public servants first and foremost. And that's what I am. And I've proven to be that. And that's why the American Board of Trial Advocates named me as the Dallas Judge of the Year last year. That's why I am consistently recommended by every newspaper and article and organization who rates candidates for judicial positions. That's why the lawyers that appear before me rate me highly in regards to my ability to preside over this court. And so I'm honored and I'm humbled by that, but I can only continue to serve with your support and your vote for Judge Madi Salamor. Thank you.
Thank you, Judge Moore. Please mute your video. And if you do have a website, please put it in the chat for everyone to see, please. And the floor is yours, Mr. Lewis.
Thank you so much. As I began earlier, my path to running for judge was a long one, and it was improbable. And after serving here in Dallas since 2010 when I arrived, I believed very strongly that I needed to step up into this position of leadership, not because we don't necessarily have a good judge under the traditional system. But just because we need a different vision for our people, it really has nothing to do with getting the best lawyer in the field. It's the person who's going to do the most to bring the community and empower them to be able to use the courts to better their communities and to obtain justice no matter what their situation is financially. I know personally that it is traumatic. It takes a life savings sometimes. It takes money that you were saving for your daughter's wedding, money you were saving for your first business, money you were saving to pay bills that you couldn't pay in the first place, to hire a lawyer and to go to court and to get justice. But you also know that people only go to court when something has happened that has affected their lives in a fundamental way. And so my goal and purpose running for judge is to give you as Dallas citizens a choice and an opportunity to be able to use the courts and the governmental resources and to better your society and your life. I have a lot of experience in business and a lot of experience that I've picked up along the way. I'd love for you to go to my website at lewis4dallas.com and learn more about me. I always welcome comments and questions. I was pushed into this by some friends of mine, Judge Faith Johnson and the Christian Legal Society and people who said, hey, we need to at least have a choice, an opportunity. And I think it makes our civic society better. I think it makes our courts better. I hope, if Judge Moore wins the day, that she will take some of the ideas and suggestions that I've had and maybe make the courts better. And I certainly will build upon her legacy if I'm elected. I thank you very much for your time. I appreciate each and every one of you. I hope you will vote Jordan Lewis for 162nd Judicial District Court. Thank you.
Thank you as well, Mr. Lewis. And please put your email address into the chat for everyone to see.
Thank you. I will.
Folks, I say every time, it takes a lot to run for office. And these, no matter what side of the aisle you're on or whomever supports you, it takes a lot to want to do this kind of public work. And so I would hope that we would all commend each and every one of the candidates we saw today for their efforts. And as you heard from both of these two candidates, there are folks out there doing some pro bono work and helping folks access the courts. So I hope that you were able to access to the courts. This has been recorded today, and you can go onto the Dallas Examiner website in a couple of days to hear the recording. But again, thank you both, Mr. Lewis and Judge Moore, for coming out today. We really appreciate it.
Thank you for the opportunity.
All right, and we're going to show our PowerPoint one more time because there's chock full of information out there regarding your voting rights. So let's do that now. And thank you for being with us this season. Don't forget, early voting starts tomorrow and goes to the 30th. And election day is November the 3rd. Make sure you take your ID. Tell your friends, take 10 people with you and make a plan.